What do you do when the most gifted person in the room is also the messiest, most sinful person in the room? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, this is Jill from the Northwoods, talking about Bible topics one small step at a time. What happens when someone you see is very talented, selfish, immature, arrogant, and frankly a disaster of a human being, but still creates something amazing, beautiful, does something that's really brave, but, maybe even moves you to tears. And that question, I think, is a hard question underneath it. Why does it bother us so much? And what does God have to say about such a thing? I was watching this because one of my favorite movies is the Amadeus movie from the 1980s. And I saw that there was a brand new TV series that was out with it, which is a good series, but it's rather R-rated because the situation was rather R-rated. The story itself was written by a man named, I think, Peter Bentley, and it was taken from interviews that were done in the past, and none of it is believed to be the actual story of Mozart and another composer named Salieri. But the story itself is so good, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And it made me think about God and Salieri's point in all of this. Like I said, it's, if you haven't seen it, exactly what happened is there's two composers, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who's one of my favorite composers. I love his music, and Antonio Salieri. They both worked in Vienna in the late 1700s. Both were very dedicated to music, but one of them was a genius, and it wasn't Salieri. The problem with Salieri is he spent his entire, not a problem, but he spent his entire life faithful, disciplined devotion to music. He studied, he worked, he was a man of God, he prayed, he didn't sleep around, he gave up on the things that young men don't usually give up on for his art and for what he believed was a sacred calling. In return, he believed, and he really believed, that God would bless him with greatness. Why wouldn't God want him to be amazing so that he could show how amazing God is? And that is, you think about that. You think you want to, put God in the best framework possible. And I want to display God's beauty through my art. So then Mozart walks in. He laughs too loud. He's crude, immature, vulgar. He's a man-child who doesn't take anything seriously and sleeps around. I don't know about Mozart. Hopefully I get a chance to meet him in heaven, but I don't know anything about Mozart and whether or not he had faith in God. But it doesn't, at least from the play, which is not true necessarily, he didn't. So, but instead, when Salieri heard the music that poured out of Mozart, it sounded like the voice of God, like it bypassed human effort and arrived from heaven. And what Salieri heard, it just destroyed him. First of all, the music came so easily to Mozart. He was writing so much music, and it was all good. While Salieri had a lot of pain to go through to write new music. It did not come to him as easily. And so the other parts of where Salieri was destroyed wasn't just because Mozart was successful, but because Salieri made a deal. He made a deal to be with God. I'm faithful, I'll be disciplined, I'll be good, and you'll bless me. So he created sort of a deal with God. And Mozart breaks the deal entirely just by existing. And so here's what I think about it, is that Salieri's pain is not unusual. Most of us have felt something maybe like that. And it might not be with music, but it might be someone else, like a coworker who got a promotion that they didn't seem to earn, that you worked very hard. You're a Christian. You have faith in God. You prayed for this promotion. And someone who lives this kind of life, they got it and you didn't. Or a sibling who shines without even trying. A person at church who seems to have every gift, and yet you always seem to maybe struggle. Or a leader whose sermons change lives, but their personal life is not equal to what they're saying on the stage. And that confusion creates this low-grade ache in us. It's envy. It can be envy for sure. But sometimes it's even grief. What you see in both the movie and the series with Mozart is that he grieves this. It's an honest question. God, why are you working this out like this? I'm faithful and he's not, and look at what you're giving him. So let's take a look at what the Bible actually says about giftedness. And the Bible never promises that the most gifted people will be the healthiest, the most faithful people, that the faithful people will be given all the gifts and the unfaithful people will just be abandoned with no gifts. It never says that, not once. And so if you look at the people's lives in the scripture, the pattern is almost uncomfortable entirely. David, a poet, a warrior, a king, described as being after God's own heart, the writer of the Psalms that people still pray and sing thousands of years later, was also capable of great moral collapse, so catastrophic, involving adultery, deception, arranging the death of an innocent man, and being a horrible father. That man, Samson, the Samson one always gets me, right? Empowered by God in a way that just defies explanation, but impulsive, self-destructive, doesn't follow the rules and laws of God at all, and he is completely incapable of learning from his own mistakes. Solomon, granted the gift of astonishing wisdom. People traveled from distant lands to hear him speak, and eventually spiritually compromised in a way that divided his kingdom. Jonah delivers one of the most effective prophetic revivals in recorded history with his work of what he did in Nineveh. People turned around, but he does it while being bitter, resentful, angry that it even worked at all because he wanted those people to burn. He just did not want the people of Nineveh to be turned around. Peter, impulsive, fearful, denied Christ 3 times in the same night he promised he never would, and later becomes the foundational pillar of the early church. This pattern is not just that God uses imperfect people. He uses imperfect people all the time. The pattern is that God uses people, period. That the gift is the vessel are not matched in the way that we wished that they were. The idea is there's a distinction here. And I think, like I said, I thought a lot about this TV show. It really kind of gets in my craw a bit, is that there's an important thing, and it's at least good to discuss this idea of the Christian life right now. Gifts are not the same thing as fruit. A person can have extraordinary gifts, creativity, charisma, intelligence, leadership, the ability to move people with words or music or vision. And that same person may have very little of what Paul called the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, patience, peace, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. These are not the same categories, and mixing them up can lead to a painful situation to those of us in the Christian life. We watch it play out publicly. The pastor who preaches the gospel with power and his life is in ruins. The worship leader in music who genuinely helps people encounter God in worship, find out they're treating people horribly behind the scenes, not living the life that they're supposed to. The author whose words on sanctification shapes a generation who also is quietly destroying his own family life. One for me, the apologist who taught you so much about how to talk about Jesus, and it turned out he was not living the life he was supposed to be living with his family. We're surprised by this, and the surprise comes down to somewhere that we still believed what Salieri believed, that gift and goodness go together, that someone who could produce something so beautiful must be living a life that is so beautiful. And the Bible doesn't teach it. 1 Corinthians is pretty much blunt about it. You can prophesy, you can move mountains, you can give away everything you own, but you still have nothing of what actually matters if you don't have love. The gift without the fruit is real, and it's not rare. We can probably think of, I mean, I was just, when writing this up, I thought of so many examples. This podcast couldn't continue on if I listed them all. We encounter this tension with the stories that we're drawn to. Amadeus is one of them, but there are others out there, brilliant artists whose lives were wrecks. They're musicians who gave world transcendent beauty and couldn't keep themselves together. A tech founder who built something that changes entire civilizations and treats people like obstacles around them, treats women and their children like obstacles around them. I mean, we can go on and on. We consume stories, in literature. We read about it all the time, of flawed geniuses, almost obsessively. I think that's probably most of literature right there. But there's something about them we can't turn away. And it's because they surface the same question that Salieri is screaming in the film. If God is just, why is it working like this? And now we live in a world of social media. It gives us the front row of gifted people all day long. We see their output. We see their highlight reels. We compare ourselves quietly and constantly to them. And we often feel the feeling that Salieri says without naming it. I think about, too. I wanted to do a Bible podcast. I want to do a Bible podcast. I want to talk about God topics. I want to have a community where we can get together and talk about God topics. And then some, kid out there who's done something stupid with his life gets 6 million views on his YouTube channel. And you're like, I'm talking about God here. Why is this not working out? And so I think each of us can. Why do they get a platform and I don't? Why does their work reach people when mine doesn't? And why does God seem to bless their efforts over there, but not right here with me? And I think that we get into this idea of what Salieri, but we have to talk about what Christianity and what Christ really offers us. I think what the Christian answer is genuinely different than all other answers available. Christianity says, yes, beautiful things can come through broken people. And not because brokenness is fine, or sin is fine, or is excused, or character doesn't matter. It does matter. There are real consequences and there are real harms. But the grace of God has never been limited to work through people whose lives are put together. If it were, nothing would ever get done. The word that keeps coming to me is vessel. Paul used it. Clays of jars of clay. The treasure isn't the jar. The treasure is what's inside the jar. And God puts that treasure in some very ordinary and very cracked containers. It doesn't mean that we stop expecting character from our leaders. It doesn't mean that we ignore when people are making a mess of their lives or the messes of the lives of their family or their congregations. It means that we stop being shocked that the gift and the person don't always match. It means that we stop arranging our spiritual lives around giftedness as a measure of God's favor. Oh, that person's really gifted. God must really be, loving, what he's doing. I want to talk about, I guess, the hidden people. And this is something that Scripture does over and over again. And I noticed that it's really quite radical in what it does. It elevates the hidden people. The widow who gave 2 coins. The woman who anoints Jesus with the expensive oil and says nothing. The servant who is faithful with the small things, entrusted with the larger things. The quiet believer in Rome who Paul greeted at the end of his letter by name. We don't know who it is. People never recorded who that person was. So not everybody's a Mozart, and never were they meant to be all Mozarts. The kingdom operates on a different math than the world does. The first will be last. The greatest will be servants. The measure of the platform or the output or the reach is faithfulness. Faithfulness in the ordinary things. Faithfulness in the quiet things. Faithfulness when nobody is watching. Nobody's applauding. Maybe no one's even clicking play on your video. That's what Jesus keeps returning to. Not to be brilliant, but to be faithful. I think if we come back to Salieri for a moment, the movie makes something very clear by the end of this. Salieri's tragedy is not that Mozart was gifted. His tragedy is that he became unable to see any beauty in his own life because he spent all of it staring at somebody else's calling. He had gifts. He had real gifts. He had a life. He had music. He had an audience, and he had influence. And he couldn't receive any of it in his life because he was so obsessed about what Mozart had. And I think that the spiritual danger for a lot of us, that when we become bitter, the way Salieri became bitter, is a real risk that we spend our one life measuring it against somebody else's calling, against somebody else's gift, and miss the ones that actually we were given, that we were meant to do good with. Your faithfulness is not diminished by someone else's gift. Your calling is not smaller because someone else's calling is louder. God is not more pleased with Mozart than Salieri. He is asking a different thing of different people. And the question is, will he ask in the end, not how brilliant you were, he's going to ask in the end, how faithful were you with what you were given? So what do we do with all of this? I think that we take small steps with simple honesty. That if you have feelings that Salieri has feelings with, name it, pray about it. Don't spiritualize it away too fast, or don't, become bitter about it. Understand that ache is real. And, for all of us, that we want to use our gifts and talents for God, and we hope it pays off, that people come to Christ, that you say this magic word and thousands go, wow, mind blown, believing in Jesus. That's not how real life tends to work. God is not offended by the question underneath this all, but he still wants us to be faithful. And the second step is that when you counter a gifted person, and even a gifted person who is messy and sinful, ask a different question. Not why them and not me, but what is God doing here? What is he making through all of this to benefit and glory his kingdom and himself? And I think the third step I keep coming back to is to turn your attention back into your own lane, not with resignation, but with intention, with quiet confidence that faithfulness in your life, with your gifts, in your season, matter deeply to God. And then turn your attention not at yourself, but towards God. If you are always facing God, if you're always putting your intentions and your heart and your love towards God, you'll work out things in the right way. And you'll notice that you're not Mozart, and you're you. You're exactly what was asked of you when you're acting faithful. You are exactly who you were meant to be. All right, everyone, thanks so much. I appreciate you joining this with me. Like I said, I've been obsessed with this story now, probably for the last 40 years. And I wanted to talk about that because I wonder how many of us ask that question. Why is that person given so many blessings and gifts, and maybe I'm not? And I want us to know how we should prayerfully deal with situations like that, instead of dealing with it how Salieri dealt with it, at least in the play. All right, everyone, thanks so much. You can find everything I do from JillFromTheNorthwoods.com. You can email me at Jill@StartWithSmallSteps.com. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much and have a great day.